Everybody. All right, I'm going to start by letting our sponsor tell us a little bit about what's going on over there at Pella.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Um, we've got a lot of actually good stuff happening ever since the pandemic has ended. And it's nice to see everybody's face. I don't recognize most of you without a mask, but we'll get through that. Pella Mid-Atlantic got bought out by a couple of actually other Pella distributors a couple of years ago, and they've invested heavily into the company. So it's allowed us to expand our capabilities, offer more products. We've got more trucks on the road. We've got more people on the road, more service techs. And Pella has backed that up with really cutting down their lead times on window and door products. So some of the stuff we're getting out in a couple of weeks. So we're really excited about that. And high level, that's about it. We appreciate everybody's support. And every time you have a project that needs windows or doors, please give us a call.
Thank you, Bob. We appreciate you guys helping us bring this content to our members. I'd also like to thank Carlene Jackson. She is a pro national partner. You will see a lot of faces from different areas on the call today because this is a pro national webinar. So there are companies calling in from all over, which is great. And we're excited about that. So I am going to start by introducing our speaker today, Dr. Chris Kuehl. I have heard him probably twice now, and I will give you my informal intro, and then I'll give you the formal one. He may be what I think might be the only funny economist in the country. I'm not positive about that, but he has a few zingers in his forecast usually, but he is a managing director for Armada Corporate Intelligence. That company, he says, has been around for 24 years, and he thought at first they might last a week. So his forecasting on his own company may not have been spot on, but they specialize in forecasts and strategic guidance and predictions for corporate clients around the world. So we are really excited to have Dr. Kuehl on the call today, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
All right, very good. I will share my screen and we will be ready to roll here. Miracles of modern technology. Ta-da. So, yes, I am not necessarily the only funny economist, but my goal in life is to be Ben Stein. So, you know, that's I want my own Visine commercial. I want Ben Stein's money. Then I'll be happy. So Armada was formed about 24 years ago, and it was formed in a bar, as all good organizations are. And my business partner at the time, we thought that we would last a week, maybe two. So we didn't really give a lot of thought to the name. We decided to call ourselves Armada because there was a big picture of a ship over the top of the bar. So we thought, what the heck? And that's what we ended up with. And the logo, if you look at it, well, it's kind of Harry Potter-esque because we knew a designer at the time and we just kind of turned her loose, and she decided that I was the wise old owl and my partner was the aggressive falcon. He had been a student of mine when I was teaching. So he had the distinction of being the only student to get an A in one of the seminal classes that I taught. I was notorious for not giving many A's, and after 5 years I only gave one, and he was the one that got it. So I figured, hey, let's start a business. So there you go, my whole sordid past. A lot of what I talk about lately has been kind of a combination of talking people off a ledge because we have been scaring ourselves to death the entire last year, or well, the last 2 or 3 years, and a lot of myth busting because a lot of the things that we sort of think we know about the economy, we don't really know. And I don't want to be a media basher. That's not really what I set out to do. I know it's a tough job, but the media has a tendency to try to take really, really complicated things and break them into sound bites. And you can't. I mean, you just can't. And it's not that the information that they give you is necessarily wrong. It's just not complete. and it's not giving you the context, and it's not explaining what's going on. And then you get a political year on top of it, where we all know the drill. The politician talks about everything over which they have no control, because that way you can't blame them for anything later. So if something doesn't happen, they'll say, well, that's not my job anyway. Well, yeah, but why did you talk about it for a year if it's not your job? So, but that's, I tend to be a somewhat conservative economist, and my attitude is follow the money. If you want to know why something's happening, that will usually tell you what you need to know. So to start with, we have the demonstration in a graph of how bad we are at our jobs. Economists are supposed to be forecasters. We're supposed to be predictors. But my favorite definition of an economist is someone who explains tomorrow why the predictions they made yesterday didn't come true today. So if you look at what we were predicting for quarterly behavior for this year, we start out the year with a couple of down quarters. And if you remember when that was first being discussed, there was this comment that this is the definition of a recession: 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. That's all it is. Well, that's not true. What defines a recession is basically determined by the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER. And NBER will never tell you that you're going into a recession. They'll never tell you you're in one. They'll only tell you you have been in one. And they look back at 26 variables, and they say, look, if these 26 variables are pointing in a recessionary direction, we can declare that you were indeed in a recession. But they don't do it as far as identifying it while you're in one. So at the beginning of the year, we had these down quarters, but we kind of know why we had the down quarters, and a lot of the other data wasn't that distressing. It's a matter of fact, a lot of it was trending in a positive direction. So then we come to quarter 3, which is where we just got the announcement of a 2.6% growth. We thought we were going to grow, 0.3, 0.5, nothing to write home about, another quarter where we weren't quite in negative territory. But instead, we blow past that and get growth at 2.6. So we'll talk a little bit about why that happened in a minute. Then the prediction is we go into another couple quarters of anemic, almost negative growth, probably down 0.5, maybe even with very little growth. We're not quite positive where that number would be. The important thing to focus on is what happens after Q1. And that is a steady recovery of the economy. So by the time you get to the fourth quarter of next year, we're back to normal growth. Even normal, a little bit on the high side. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's the case too. So here's what we think we know happened as far as quarter 3. The reason that we saw a decline in the first and second quarter had to do with exports. We are not as export driven as, say, Germany. Germany relies on exports for 55% of their GDP. We rely on exports for maybe 20%. 15 to 20%, so it's significant. The two things that we export: manufactured goods and agriculture. So it's food and machinery. And here's where I do a little bit of myth busting and semi-rant about manufacturing. We do not understand the role of manufacturing in the United States. It has been bashed and beaten up by the press for decades. You keep getting these comments like, we're no longer a manufacturing nation. We don't make anything. Everything we get from China, blah, blah, blah. The United States accounts for 40% of the value of global manufacturing. China accounts for 15%. We account for twice the value. China makes the junk that goes in Walmart. We make the machines the Chinese use to make the junk that goes in Walmart. We make airplanes. We make road building equipment. 92% of all the railroad engines in the world are made in the United States. It's not like you have multiple companies making railroad engines. It's a fairly limited market. So you get one dominant producer who is in the U.S. So we are a dominant manufacturing nation. The only country in the world that rivals us in terms of value is Germany. So between us and the Germans, we account for nearly 70% of global manufacturing value. The other thing you constantly hear is that not many people work in manufacturing. You hear the same criticism around construction and agriculture. But the reason that we do that assessment is that we don't collect the data in necessarily the right way. When we're trying to figure out what people do for a living, we literally want to know how many accountants are there, how many lawyers are there, how many accounts receivables people are there, how many carpenters are out there, how many plumbers are out there. We don't care who they work for. We just want to know what their job function is. So 92% of the people who work at Ford Motor Company are not in manufacturing, because only 8% of them are actually on the line putting parts together to create a car. It's because all the other work that's being done for that is being done by robots. But the other people working for Ford in HR, in accounts receivable, in design, in whatever else, they're just as much a part of that company as anybody else. And they would be shocked to discover that they're not in manufacturing. If you look at where people work instead of what they do, 30% of the population works for a manufacturer, 1/3. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that's pretty significant. Yeah, you think? We also don't really recognize that manufacturing is a small business. 75% of manufacturers in this country have 25 employees or less. So we don't understand construction very well. We don't understand manufacturing very well. We don't really quite understand what drives the economy. We sort of do, but we have to dig past some of the numbers. And where this relates to GDP is that when we were dealing with a very strong dollar and everybody else's currency was weak, it restricted export activity, because buyers were doing exactly the same thing a consumer would do here. You decide you need a new washer and dryer. Do you buy it now, or do you wait for the white sale in January? Of course you wait for the white sale. You know it's going to be cheaper, so why would you buy it now? You wait for a sale. The rest of the world is looking at the manufactured goods that we sell saying, yeah, I'm going to buy that. Not now. Right now, my currency is weak. The US is raising interest rates. The Fed has gotten more active and more aggressive, but my bank will sooner or later. European Central Bank will raise their rates, Reserve Bank of Australia, Bank of India, Bank of Canada, they all will, and they all have started to. So our currency isn't weakening, theirs is strengthening. And as they're strengthening, suddenly it's like, you know, that thing I wanted to buy, now it's the time. And as a result, we saw a lot of that export activity in third quarter at the same time that the US consumer began to cut back a little and say, we're not buying as much in the way of imports as we were. So we end up getting this growth in third quarter. Didn't expect it in third quarter, probably thought we were going to see it maybe later into 23, but these other banks got more aggressive faster than we thought they would. So does it really change the Fed's assessment? Obviously not. They raised interest rates again today, another 3/4 of a point, as they said they were going to for a long time. So we'll talk a little bit about the implications for that in a moment as well. So there are reasons to worry about a slowdown, a recession, however you want to characterize it. The old joke used to be that it's a downturn if your neighbor loses their job. It's a recession if you lose your job. It's a depression if the economist loses their job. So we're clearly not at depression level, thank goodness. Mostly what's been driving the fear of recession is reacting to inflation. And the Fed has been raising rates trying to deal with inflation. At the same time that they keep pointing out that the kind of inflation we're dealing with now is not something they're particularly well equipped to deal with. You all remember your Econ 101 class fondly, I'm sure. You probably have your textbook someplace in prominent location in your home. Two kinds of inflation: demand pull and cost push. The only thing the Fed can really affect is demand pull. This is when demand overwhelms the ability of the producer to keep up. There is too much money in circulation. Consumers have too much cash. Businesses have too much cash. They're driving the producers crazy with demand. The producers can't keep up. And the only way that you can really affect that demand pattern is to raise your prices, and that controls a little bit of that demand. something that is also part of my dim, distant past, which will come up here and again shortly. I started out as a Soviet and East European specialist. Back in the 80s, I was studying to be a spook. I was going to work for the agency, study the evil empire the rest of my life, all set to just, what a guaranteed job. And then right in the middle of my PhD, they go out of business. I mean, seriously, I wrote a nasty letter to Gorbachev saying you couldn't wait a year. I'm in the middle of my defense. But back when I was a Soviet specialist, I spent time in the old Soviet Union, and they were very proud of the fact that they did not have inflation because they just simply had shortage. When you had more demand than there was production to keep up, it was just, you would like food? Niet, no food. But I have money, no food. No matter how much money you have, no food, go away. Well, that's one way of controlling excess demand. It's not a particularly pleasant one. But the kind of inflation we're dealing with now is cost push. And that's a lot of what you guys have been dealing with. The cost of things to do your job keep going up. And it's partly due to demand, but it's largely due to something like a broken supply chain. You've got a lot of stuff that's been coming in from Asia. Suddenly it's not coming in from Asia. China has been diligently wrecking its own economy. They've not seen growth this slow in 20 years. And part of it is because they are still in this lockdown phase. And we don't need to go into detail on that, but it has messed up the supply chain. You've had transportation issues. At one point earlier in the year, there were 14 loads for every truck on the road. And that was driving up logistics costs. So an awful lot of the cost push type of inflation is kind of immune to interest rate changes. I mean, it's not going to affect Chinese production to raise interest rates. It's not going to affect the Russian invasion of Ukraine to raise interest rates. We have seen oil prices skyrocket. They've come down since, but not enough to really eliminate the problem. You still have huge energy issues in Europe, et cetera. Interest rate changes anywhere is not going to have an impact on that particularly. So the Fed keeps saying, look, we're doing what we're expected to do. We're raising rates. We're trying to control inflation, but don't expect it to have an immediate impact. As a matter of fact, we've seen a pattern over the years when it comes to rates, and we're right about at the point where that pattern starts to shift. Historically, for the last 50, 60 years, you see interest rates coming up right about to the peak of inflation, and then they stop coming up. And usually within 7 months, they come back down again, because this is the Fed reacting to trying to control inflation. They wait until, I mean, literally the way it's positioned is they push until something breaks, and then they lower rates to fix what it was that broke. And they're just about at that point. It's like, okay, if you listen to Lael Bernard, who's the vice chair, she's saying, look, we will stop raising rates when the unemployment rate reaches about 4.5. It's about 3.2 now. So there's no reason for us to quit. But when that happens, then we will start thinking through reducing our desire to raise rates and at some point reverse it. We're also going to watch consumer expectations a lot, but a lot of it comes down to employment, and employment is still very low. Unemployment is still 3.2. We still have the highest quit rate that we've seen in probably 20 years. And quit rate is a really good way of measuring people's confidence in the job market, because the quit is different than taking a new job. The quit is the guy that wakes up and says, God, I hate my job. I hate the people I work with. I hate my boss most of all. I'm quitting. I passed 14 help wanted signs yesterday. I can get a job anytime I want. That used to be almost all service sector jobs. Now, almost half the people that are quitting are in IT, because they know they can get a job anytime they want one, and it'll be a bidding war. I mean, you could put on your resume that you're a part-time serial killer and you would still get a job in IT. I mean, it's just, it's out of control because it's a very, very hot commodity right now. You're probably running into that as well. But the whole worker shortage thing has altered what goes on with employment. Many of the manufacturers and the construction companies and the others that I talked to said, look, under normal circumstances, we might have been doing layoffs by now. We've seen enough business decline that it would have us thinking about it. We're not laying off anybody. It has been so hard to find the people we have. We're not about to lose them, because if we do get a recovery next year, where are we going to find these guys? It took us 2-3 years to find the ones we have. So we're not going to go back to that kind of search again. So companies are hanging on to their employees a lot more aggressively than they might have in previous years. So you look at some of the indicators, not that graphs are infallible, but real business sales still climbing. Not a little, a lot. I mean, they're really spiking in inventory build and buying new machinery and spending money even on the residential side of things, consumer spending. Real business sales is not the only thing. Industrial production, the latest numbers came out, we saw a 2.6 gain over last year. Saw a 0.4 gain over last month. Employment is still solid. Real income still solid. If we do go into some kind of a recession globally, which we probably will, it's going to be a reaction to the two bizarre years we've just been through. 2020 was the most bizarre recession we've ever experienced because it was a recession by edict. There was nothing wrong with the economy at the beginning of 2020. We were predicting 3 to 3.5% growth. But all of a sudden it was like, we have this disease. We don't know anything about it. We don't know how to stop it. We don't really know where it came from. So we think it's a good idea to completely shut down the world's economy. We think it's a great idea to put 49 million people out of work in 2 weeks. We think it's a great idea to shut down 500,000 businesses in 1 month. And it created a recession. And whether it had much of an impact on COVID is yet to be determined. It doesn't really appear that was the case. But we get to 2021 and we get a rebound because people were allowed to go back to what they had been doing prior to the downturn. And it was crazy. I mean, you all kind of remember early 21, all of a sudden people could travel again, they could go out to eat again. So it's like, wow, I'm going to go visit people I don't even like just because I can travel again. I'm going to go out to eat 14 times today just because I can. So we had this huge growth in 21 at a pace we never grow at. I mean, we were at 6% growth in 21. So coming off of that, everything feels downturnish. As we start to go forward, 23, 24, we're kind of going back to where we were in 2014, 2016, not right home about growth. We're in that 2.5 to 3% range, which is where we tend to be over the last 20 years. Oil outlook, had a lot of conversation not long ago about the Saudis and they're siding with the Russians and all this stuff. They're not siding with anything except the desire to make money. They're trying to protect the per barrel price. They are trying to protect that range between 70 and 90 bucks a barrel. That's where their sweet spot is. They were reacting more to U.S. production than anything else. We're on the way to setting a records in daily production. We're at about 13 million barrels per day now, probably close to 14 million barrels per day next year. We consume around 20. Most of what we get to make up that gap, we get from Canada or Mexico or a few other Latin American states. We are oil independent if we want to be. The only reason the East Coast refineries still buy oil from the Middle East or Africa is it's cheaper. There's no good pipeline that runs from the middle of the U.S. to the East Coast. The only thing we have is the Colonial, and it's constantly in need of repair. So for the Jersey refineries, for example, much cheaper to buy by tanker from the Middle East. So much of what Saudi Arabia was doing was reacting to the fact that we were producing more. And if you look at how much they decided to cut, about 1 million barrels a day, that's about the same amount we increased. Funny how that works. If you look at the predictions for the coming year, things are going to be cheaper than they were last year. Probably crude around 90 bucks, gasoline 350, 360, depending on where you are. Most of the variation in gas pricing is taxes. If you go out to California, I was there not too long ago, A gallon of gas outside San Diego was $6.85, and 2/3 of that was tax. You go to Wyoming, it's the cheapest gas in the country because their taxes are very low. So if you really want to save money, you swing by Cody and then you go back home, and you can save some money, but it's a long drive. Diesel, probably around $4. These next few graphs are things that Armada does, and I won't dwell on these particularly long except to make one kind of observation. The guy that built our models, the guy that we work with on this project, he's a retired lieutenant colonel who used to be in the artillery. And he said, when I was in the artillery, accuracy was really, really important. So he developed this 25 variable system to track where a shell was going to go. So now he uses that same technique to track the industrial economy. And you get 3 distinct phases. The blue line shows all the growth that we were getting through 21. I mean, this was coming up very sharply. Investing in inventory, investing in machines. Then you get the drop off. The investment period is over and people don't need to buy as much as they were. But then that trough ends in about mid 23 and starts to recover. The very latest version of this still have that growth, but the decline line is not as steep. The recovery is earlier, a little bit flatter, and then continues to get back to where we were close to the peak. If you look at particular industries, aerospace was going down, now it's going back up. Aerospace can't keep up. Not only are they buying new airplanes, but they're working the ones they have to death because the business community is flying again. And they are desperately trying to get parts out to these things because they're wearing them out. And they can't keep up with the new demand. And it's just ridiculous how much there's suddenly enthusiasm for flying again. The airlines did not think the business community would be back as aggressively as it has been. You look at automotive, they haven't seen growth like this in 40 years. We have clients that are in the business of advising car dealers, and they said they've never seen anything like this. Every car coming off the assembly line is pre-sold. It's hitting the dealer for like a day before it gets snapped up. I was talking to a bunch of Mercedes dealers about a week ago. This guy said, I've never seen anything like this before. I have over 200 customers who have been making car payments on a car they don't have and will not have for another year, perhaps 2. By the time they actually get the car, they will have paid for it. And it's like, this is insane. But they're like, I want a new car and it's not ready yet, but I want to make sure that when it does come off the assembly line, I'm the first one to get it. We've not seen as good a performance with machinery because it peaked last year. We saw a lot of investment in machinery. The peak was reached. Now you sort of see a decline. Industrial capacity is back to normal. We want to be in that range between 80 and 85%. Under 80%, there's too much slack. Over 85%, you're beginning to strain capacity. And that's when you start buying new machines, hiring new people. We've been under 80% for 10 years. And all of a sudden, 4 months in a row, we're above 80%, which is a sign of growth, not decline. Durable goods orders also performing better than we thought. So here we hit unemployment. 4.5 is the magic number as far as the Fed is concerned, and we're still quite a ways away from it. But we're seeing a very different job market, and this is something that's been affecting the remodeling industry in a spectacular and not necessarily positive way. It has gotten harder and harder and harder to find the skills. This is an industry that's suffering the way industries in manufacturing and others. The average remodeling guy is not young. They're in their 50s, in some cases in their 60s. These are people that got into the industry a long time ago and have stayed in the industry for a variety of reasons, but it's harder and harder to get the new employee into it. And remodelers have the same problem that many of the manufacturers have. They're small. So you get people who say stupid things like, well, why don't you train your own people? Why are you waiting for trade schools? And it's like, well, given the fact that these are small companies, what that means is you're turning to your senior guy and you're saying, hi, I want you to train Skippy here. We hired Skippy because he fogged a mirror and he doesn't know squat about anything, but you're going to hire him. And so the senior guy is like, "You going to give me release time to do this? You going to give me a big honking raise?" No. Buddy, do you know that the number one way that companies are hiring these days is poaching? And the guy across the street has been trying to poach me for ages, and he's not asking me to train Skippy. So, see ya. I'm going to go work for him. We need pipelines. We need people coming into these industries with at least rudimentary skills that they can be taught. And we just don't do that. And I could go on for days about, put it this way, last year, I mean, granted, it was a busier year. We graduated 60,000 students with advanced degrees in film criticism. So if you need to add movie reviews to your remodeling offering, meanwhile, I kind of make up my own mind whether a movie sucks or not. But, occasionally, I guess you have to have expertise. We still have 10 million people, 10 million jobs on offer, only about 6 million people that are willing to take them. Many of the 6 million don't have the skills to take the jobs on offer. But you've also got the development that is playing a bigger and bigger role in the environment, which is the gig economy. We're familiar with it with things like Lyft and Uber and DoorDash and all that, but it gets more complicated. I gave a talk to the Dry Cleaners Association not long ago. Their biggest concern is internet laundry. And during the COVID year, you had 7 million women that were literally sent home to take care of their children because the schools were closed. Well, they still had to have income. And many of them discovered that, if you advertise on the local internet that you'll do other people's laundry, you can make some money at this. The average take home turned out to be $350 a day. So a lot of these women were like, I could go back and take that minimum wage $15 an hour job and make $120 a day, or I can keep on doing other people's laundry for $350 a day. And oh, by the way, nobody knows that I'm doing somebody's tidy whities but me and them. I'm not sharing this with the IRS. So it's pure money. The number one client for this kind of home job was the millennial male. The millennial male that never learned to do anything. Mom used to do my laundry, so now somebody else has to. But that gig economy is a real thing, and it's really being driven predominantly by IT. People can do IT work from anywhere. And what is being discovered in the IT world is that many of these guys are working 3 or 4 full-time jobs. They're just not telling their employers. It's just like, oh yeah, he's my full-time employee. Well, he's also his full-time employee and his full-time employee. Nobody knows they're doing it from home. Most of the people that did the hiring wouldn't understand the tech if their life depended on it. I mean, it's like one of the solutions, I think, to the labor crisis is to change child labor laws. Most of the expertise to keep your computers running is in your 10-year-old children. So it's like, just get them to work. It's like, come on, daddy needs help to get off mute. Get in here. And so let's just change the laws, and now these little rugrats can make some money. Number one thing that's challenging remodelers and a lot of others is what the worker now demands. The most important thing to them is that flexible schedule. That's possible in a lot of industries, not so much remodeling. It's kind of like, yeah, I know you like to work at 2 a.m. You're a night owl. That's not real popular with our customers. And you really kind of need to be there when we want you to be there. But a lot of what's driving that demand for flexibility is this. The boomers are getting revenge. We promised that we would when you were a child. We looked at you and said, one day I'm getting even. Right now, you're making me change your diapers and do all kinds of unpleasant things. But someday I'm going to be old and you're going to be changing my diapers. And so you're going to have to suck it up and realize that you're going to be taking care of us in our declining years. So a lot of people are literally coming back to their employer saying, look, I don't have a choice. Mom and dad are living at home. I've got to take them to the doctors. I've got to do what I have to do. I mean, it's one of the number one challenges for people who are trying to work in the traditional way is the number of people with Alzheimer's. You can't go to work and have somebody at home who's dealing with Alzheimer's. Somebody has to take care of them. And that's one of the reasons that not only are you getting the demand for flexible schedules, but you're getting more single wage earner households where one of the spouses is working, the other is not, because they have to take care of people at home. Mentioned earlier, the transportation was beginning to return to semi-normal. We were at 14 loads per truck for a while. Now we're at 4 loads per truck, still expensive, but that port congestion has kind of eased. The container prices are coming down a little. They're still like twice what they were a year or so ago. There is a huge jump in the number of trucking companies. We've had 60,000 trucking companies come into existence in the last year and a half. Most of them are very small, and it's a very easy industry to get into. I mean, somebody says, hey, I want to be in trucking. What do I need? A truck and a CDL. Oh, so if I get me one of them CDLs and a truck, I can be a trucker? Yep. All you got to do is find somebody who wants you to put something in it. So it's a really easy entry business. It's also a really easy exit business. So once the demand begins to ebb and supply is now over, then you'll see as many of those companies come out of business as you saw go into business. But for now, they're kind of addressing that capacity issue. Inflation, obviously top of mind for everybody. 2 ways to measure it, and the one that mostly gets attention in the press is not the most accurate. You look at the CPI because it comes out every month. It's very current. The problem with the CPI is it is partly artificial. It's based on a mythical basket of goods that a typical family of 4 buys. And there's 2 problems with that. Number 1, you better get that basket right. And it changes. We don't know exactly what people buy from one month to the next. Number 2, there's no such thing as a typical family of 4. So you end up with a measurement that's off. And if you pick the wrong thing to put in the basket, or you're getting different performance from what is the common household makeup, you're going to end up overinflating inflation. The Fed does not pay attention to CPI. The Fed looks at this. This is PCE, personal consumption expenditures. This is studying what people actually bought and what it actually cost when they bought it. So there's no predictive part to it. The challenge you can see right away. CPI, we got CPI numbers at the beginning of October. We'll get a new set here in another week for November. The most current PCE, which will come out in about will be August. So we're not going to know what inflation was in September or October or even August because PCE lags. You have to wait for the data to be collected. The Fed pays attention to this, and specifically, they pay attention to 12-month PCE inflation trimmed mean. And you remember fondly, I'm sure, your statistics class, and you remember the trimmed mean just says get rid of the upper and get rid of the lower and look at the stuff in the middle. The Fed would like to see this number be around 2. They would tolerate 2.5. Right now, it's about 4.5. So it's 2 points higher than they would like it to be. It's still very high inflation, but it is not quite as kind of shocking as 8-9%. And it's like, well, really, it probably isn't 8 or 9%. It's going to be very high with things like food. It's going to be very high with things like fuel. A lot of other prices actually went down, and particularly when you're looking at imported goods because the dollar has been strong, etc. Most of what we've seen when it comes to inflation has come from those non-core prices, food and fuel. Eventually, the other prices begin to catch up. We don't count fuel when we're looking at inflation. We do count airline fees and freight rates, which are going to reflect higher fuel prices. We don't count food and fuel because they're too volatile. And economists hate it because it messes up our models. We can't adequately compare quarter to quarter, month to month, because the numbers change too much. So another indication that would suggest that we're not really in as bad a shape as we ostensibly seem to be, cap spending. Granted, cap spending always looks like an EKG. It's up and it's down, and it's up and it's down, and it's firing off like crazy 1 minute and then collapses another. But right now it's at record levels. And a lot of it's being driven by this desire to compensate for lack of workforce with machinery. And we're starting to see machinery get into things that it's never been in before. We've seen it for years in manufacturing. We see it in construction. We see it in heat and healthcare. But the other day, I had my first experience with a robot server. I was in a restaurant in St. Louis. It was a corporate kind of conference hotel / casino. So I go down for breakfast and I order, and they hand me this little device, which I think is a pager to tell me that my food's ready. Oh no, it's connected to a robot that comes rolling out of the back of the restaurant, rolls up to my table, and says, "Good morning. You ordered eggs Benedict, a glass of orange juice, and a cup of coffee. Would you please sample your coffee to see if it's the right temperature?" So I dutifully do. "If you're satisfied, please hit my green button." So I do. And the little robot says, "Thank you, I'm leaving now," and rolls off. Best service I've gotten in months. The little robot actually cared if my coffee was hot. So I talked to the guy at the restaurant saying, "This can't be cheap." He says, "No, it's not. It's not cheap at all." But I am so sick of dealing with the people who apply for jobs as servers. They don't show up. They don't tell me they're not going to show up. They show up drunk. They show up stoned. They show up with a bad attitude. I've got two kinds of customers here. I've either got business people like you who are here for a conference, or I've got the elderly that's come in to play the casino. Neither one of them want to be dealt with by some kid with more metal on his face than I have in my kitchen. And I'm tired of it. I'm just tired of it. The elderly love because she has a little apron on that says Marge. They love Marge. They come and talk to her for 20 minutes. She doesn't say much, but she's a good listener. It's like we've sort of started to make that transition where technology is getting into the service sector. A friend of mine's father is one of these curmudgeon types, and he was buying something at some hardware store, and as he's leaving, he sees the manager and he says, "So, what's the employee discount here?" And the guy goes, "Why?" "Well, I got the stuff off the shelf myself. I opened the box myself. I got it through the store myself. I checked myself out. Apparently, I work here. So what's my discount?" It's like, "Well, it's self-service." "Yeah, just my point. I work here. Where's my discount?" So we're increasingly replacing people with technology whenever we can. So global manufacturing numbers are still halfway decent. We are still in positive territory, just barely. Our latest number is like 50.9. The reason we pay so much attention to PMI is that it's a survey, so it's current, but it's also an honest survey. One of the challenges, like my least favorite survey, is consumer confidence, because they get a phone call in the middle of the day and some chirpy voice says, "Are you feeling confident?" Sure, why not? Consumers don't have a clue. But you call a purchasing manager and you say, "Are you buying more or less steel?" "More." "How come?" "I don't know. I don't even know what we make. Somebody told me to buy more steel and we're out of toilet paper." I'm the purchasing manager, man. I just buy what they tell me to buy. I don't know why. I don't care why. You think I'm going to question my CFO? He's going to look at me and say, "Binkley, just do your job." So it's honest. They don't know enough to lie, so they don't. And you either see more buying or less or the same. And if you're buying more, the assumption is the economy is growing. If you're buying less, the assumption is the economy is not growing. So right now, most of the countries are right on that edge between not growing and growing. We're still in the growing category by the skin of our teeth, but we're still there. We're seeing a little bit of catching up when it comes to inventory to sales ratio. You can tell who's behind and who's ahead. Still a lot of undersupply in automotive and retail, getting a little bit of catch up in some of the durable goods categories, a little bit of catch up on hardware, plumbing, and heating. The demand is finally being met, that you're finally getting enough of this production coming in either from overseas or domestically. And that's been driven by a lot of things. Now, a few slides that get right to the heart of the remodeling world. Residential construction is still growing. It's not growing the same way. It's not single family now as much as it's multifamily. Permits for multifamily units are as high as they've been since the 1980s. So we're seeing a lot of multifamily activity, not as much single family. On the non-residential side, warehousing, logistics, supply chain oriented, but even office buildings are starting to make a comeback. The bloom is off the Zoom rose. We still use it. Obviously, we're doing it now, but people are becoming more and more interested in getting back amongst themselves and traveling again and doing sales calls and all that kind of stuff. So you're beginning to see offices make a comeback. As I said, permits are forward looking. Permits in general are down, but multifamily are stronger than they've been since the 80s. If you look at remodeling as kind of an indicator of what happens in the economy as a whole, whenever there is deep recession, you generally get less response on the remodeling side than elsewhere. New construction feels a bigger drop than remodeling does, and for pretty obvious reasons. People that might have gone off in search of a new home or something like that are more apt to change the home they're in rather than try to get out there and buy in a down market, because prices are still high. Mortgage rates are now higher than they've been in years, and people are worried a little bit about the potential for a downturn later. The index for remodeling is still very strong. It's flattening out, but after a long period of growth. I mean, so we're looking at numbers that are going to be pretty healthy going into the next several years. It's not the kind of growth pattern that we saw for several years, but it's steady. And that's something that a lot of sectors have not been able to point to. There is a little bit of a sense among remodelers that there's the potential for a downturn, but given the fact that this is an index that indicates that anything over 50 is growth, the numbers are still in the 70s and 80s. So even with a little bit of a slowdown, it's like, yeah, well, it's not as robust as it has been, but it's still robust. You're not getting the kind of remodeling that is connected to resale. One of the things that obviously drives remodeling is you're getting ready to sell the house, and so all the things you've been putting off for all these years, you decide to do so you can sell it. But you still have people doing the remodeling for where they plan to stay. The two things that were driving it in 2020 was people setting up offices at home so they could do the Zoom thing. That slowed down. But what hasn't slowed down is remodeling for the elderly. So as people are moving back in, trying to make houses more accommodating, trying to give the new residents more privacy, etc. So that kind of remodeling is still in the growth mode. We're seeing a lot of reshoring, which is kind of coming along with that supply chain distress. 68% of global supply chain managers are now rethinking the whole thing. Friendshoring is now the big deal. If you're going to source overseas, try to pick a country that doesn't hate you. And China at this point is heading as fast as it can back to the era of Mao Zedong. I mean, if you've been watching what's been going on in China, I mean, it is a complete rejection of the whole Deng Xiaoping to get rich is glorious. In the last 3 weeks, the reports are that over 5 million Chinese millionaires have fled China. They are so convinced that they are going to get stripped of their wealth, that they're going to find themselves on the wrong side politically, that they are bolting. And people wondered for years, why are all these Chinese companies investing in the US and Europe and elsewhere? That's part of it. It's like I have a friend up in Nebraska that was saying this entire Chinese company just showed up in Grand Island, Nebraska. And it's like, where did you guys come from? Shanghai. What are you doing here? We don't want to live in Shanghai anymore. That's why we bought property out here. So it's like, boom. It's like all of a sudden, it's like, wow, maybe we're going to get a new Chinese restaurant here soon, because it's just people trying to get away from what's going on in China. I could go on for days about this, but I won't. So you're seeing a lot of development around this whole issue of expanding your capabilities and bringing in machinery. And it's one of the ironies that you could make your workers work in some horrible cinder block, unair conditioned junk place. But as soon as you bring in the robots and the computers, they don't like it when it's dirty and hot, and they refuse to work. So they have to upgrade the buildings to make the robots happy. Mentioned earlier that it was the dollar that was driving a lot of activity, both in the third quarter and responsible for first and second. And then the last thing, and then I'll shut up and we can take time for questions. This is literally the $3.5 trillion question. There is still an incredible amount of money in the hands of consumers, and not just any consumer. These are the more well-heeled consumers. Those that are making less than 50K, they're living check to check. The inflation has hit them hard, but those that are in the 100K to 200K and above still have a lot of disposable income, and they're the ones that have most of that 3.5 trillion. What are they going to do with it? Are they going to spend it yet this holiday season, or are they going to do it next year? Three things we watched during this time of year. First one of them was Halloween. Halloween is now the second largest spending holiday in the US calendar. This was the 5th year in a row that adult costumes outsold children's. It is now an adult holiday. It is a party holiday. It is a decorating holiday. And it was a pretty successful one this year. We had good numbers for Halloween. Next comes Black November. Used to be Black Friday. Now it's the entire month is full of discounts and sales. Then comes the critical part of Christmas. This is when the American male saves Christmas. And we do it every year the same way. We do not believe Christmas will be on the 25th. We're certain that it's in March this year. We have plenty of time. Suddenly it dawns on us, it's 2 days before Christmas. We have not bought anything for anybody, and we frantically start shopping. Retailers know this. They have pulled all the good stuff off the shelves, put it in back, brought the junk out front because we will buy anything, and we give it to our loved ones. They give us that look. They bring it back to the store and spend 2 to 3 times what we spent on the original gift. If we thought we were being clever and we gave them gift cards, because nothing says, I love you, honey, been married for 20 years, buy yourself something nice. She does and spends 4 to 5 times the value of the gift card. So Retail Federation studied male shopping habits and realized that of the men who shop the last 2 days before Christmas, 50% of what they purchase is at a convenience store. So if you have been the proud recipient of a scratcher's ticket and a 6-pack, you now know why. So it's the man. We save Christmas every year, so we end up creating a bigger shopping opportunity after Christmas than you have before. If we have a solid Christmas and we spend a lot of that 3.5 trillion, that will push us out of a recession in 2023. If we hang on to that for one reason or the other, we've got more chance of a downturn. A lot of it's going to depend on how secure people feel about their jobs. So with that, I'm going to shut up. And since I started with his guy, I decided to end with his guy. Seems appropriate for people who are sick of HGTV. If you could stop making people think kitchen and bathroom remodels only take 3 days, that would be great. So there really is an HGTV phenomenon. The fastest growing communities in the United States are often connected to HGTV. Fastest growing community in Mississippi, Laurel. Everybody wants to be where Ben and Aaron are. Fastest growing community in Texas, Waco. So it's crazy. Even people interested in downtown Indianapolis, because, and here's your last trivia of the day. I'm sure you're familiar with Mina on Good Bones. Mina is now in the top 5 sexiest women for men over 55. Because once you get over 55, you've got to be cute and know how to run a nail gun. So it's like priorities change. So with that, I'm going to shut up, see if there are any questions. And by the way, those of you who are going to be consuming this in recorded fashion, I am just as long-winded in print as I am in public, so feel free to send me a question by email. My address is on the bottom of the screen, and I'll be more than happy to answer it that way. We write a lot. The flagship comes out every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It sells for the same as a Starbucks caramel macchiato, so feel free. Any questions? I promise to shut up, so I will now.
I have just one comment. That last list of HGTV shows that you mentioned
Yes.
have all been recognized recently by the EPA for violating lead paint and renovation rules on their shows online, and all of them have settled for money and educational content about lead paint.
Yeah, I used to wonder about that because I'd be watching this demo and I'm like, yeah, I've seen real demo and it doesn't look like this. So
So they've all been rewarded. But I took myself off mute about your comment about men and Christmas. And I would just like to offer an alternate perspective that, how long is it going to take women to realize that this is not something that is something we're good at? And, take
exactly.
pressure off of us.
Exactly. Women are still generally trying to figure out what it is we are good at, but it's like one of these days they'll figure it out. So
There's only one here, so she's going to say something.
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
not. I am just going to let y'all continue to. And Debbie Kane is here too. She's just listening.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway.
Angela and Debbie are just kind of like, I can send you guys notes if you really want to know. So
That is always my favorite part of your presentation, Chris, where you just blast men for the Christmas thing. It is still 5 years later, they're still doing it. But I'm
it is.
all about like, just give me the gift card and let me spend it early on.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. My wife just basically said, "Yes, I know you love me. Just give me cash. Just give me
Right.
cash. Just basically." And I just look at her like, "Honey, you control the checkbook anyway. Just do whatever you want." My favorite story when I was still an academic was I went to a conference and all these heavy hitters, and I'm out to dinner with them. Don't ask me why. I'm sitting at a table with 2 Nobel Prize winners, 2 guys that are on the Fed, 2 guys that have written economics textbooks. It comes time to pay. Nobody has a credit card. Everybody is pulling money out of their pockets in envelopes. And I'm turning to Jimmy Buchanan, Nobel Prize winner from Kentucky, and he looks at me and says, "Son, I only understand money in a theoretical sense. My wife gives me an envelope full of money, and if I need more, I ask her for more." And Alan Blinder, who's on the Fed, saying, "Oh, I haven't seen my own checkbook in 27 years." So
That is so funny.
yeah, these are the people that are making your economic decisions. So if you'd like to know why they don't always work out, and remember, I pulled my envelope out when I was at that meeting as well.
So, Chris, I have a question. What about new construction? Are the stats that we're seeing on that as bad as they are? Because what that usually translates into is they start playing in our sandbox, and we don't want
Right.
that.
Yep, the new construction has been almost entirely focused on multifamily. The single family market has really dropped off. I mean, the number of mortgages down 80%. I mean, it's just anybody who wanted to buy a house and had the wherewithal did it because they were expecting mortgage rates to go up at some point. So that market has really dried up, but the multifamily is still flying because we're still short 5 million homes. And we only build like 1.5 million a year. So where the really interesting data is coming, but it's still fuzzy. The millennial who is still looking to buy single family is looking at the inner ring suburbs. And this again is kind of HGTV related. All the millennials think that they can do their own reno. And they're looking at the inner ring suburbs that the boomers kind of abandoned 10, 20 years ago. They're not looking for the exurb places anymore. That Zoom COVID driven stuff is gone, but they're now looking at those kind of older neighborhoods that have been semi abandoned. And you've got communities that are actively trying to get that investment. They're giving incentives to buy into these neighborhoods, et cetera. So new construction, a lot of those builders, at least at this point, have switched from single family to multifamily, haven't really started to push into the remodeling world yet. If the multifamily starts to dry up, then they probably will. But at the moment, they're saying, hey, I can still make a lot of money. And partly because there's still a lot of investment going into multifamily.
So
Chris, one of the things we're putting
multifamily,
in
doesn't that mean rental property?
Yeah. Yep. It means
So-
rental property. It means you've got communities that, well, I mean, I'm from Kansas City, and a good example of what will stimulate that kind of housing. Panasonic announced that it was going to build a new facility to build batteries. 4,000 employees coming in the next 3 to 5 years, about 6,000 some odd in the construction phase. Almost immediately, multifamily started going up around that location because it was like, okay, we've got all these people that are going to be coming in. Where are they going to live? And so, I mean, I went by that sector because it's an old sunflower ammunition base, and I counted 14 multifamily projects that just started in like the last 6 months.
So what are the long-term effects of that on an individual's wealth?
What ends up happening, it depends on how long you've got a resident staying in that multifamily option. It used to be fairly short. You used to have, particularly for Gen Xers and particularly for boomers, rental was a very temporary thing. And people, but now you're looking at millennials and particularly Gen Z, at least what they're saying now is, I'm not going to go single family. I don't want the hassle. I just want to keep renting. I don't want to own the house. I don't want all the crap that comes with ownership. I'm just going to stay in this apartment because if I wear it out and don't like it, I'll just move.
So what
And-
happens when they're in their 60s and they're looking for, I mean, all my equity is mostly in my house.
Yep.
They don't have any of that, do
Yep.
they?
This is definitely a problem, but they're sort of the attitude like 60. You know, I'm like, I'm 25, man. You know, I don't have to worry about
Yeah.
that. You know, so it's a little bit of the, you know, ignoring their parents and grandparents' advice, because you're absolutely right. I mean, that for the vast majority of people, it is the home that ends up being their equity pay. And the thing that the millennials and certainly Gen Z, a lot of the retirement stuff might not even be around by the time they're at the point of gathering it. I mean, the boomers have been trying to kind of warn you, saying, you do realize we're spending your inheritance. You know, I mean, we're not leaving you bupkis. So you're on your own.
So Chris, how do you account for the tremendous number of residential subdivisions and residential development that's actually rent
Mhm.
single family?
Yeah.
Yep.
We have a tremendous push in the past year and a half for major developers around the country to be developing entire subdivision, whole communities
Right.
that are rental single family homes.
Yep, they're exactly taking advantage of the fact that you still got this kind of transient attitude. The whole COVID escape from the city thing drove people into these exurbs and neighborhoods, and some of them were in a position to buy, many of them weren't. And so the solution, particularly since a lot of these subdivisions are being developed by investment funds, they're like, hey, we just need to make some income off these things. And so we will accommodate people who are just going to rent for a period of time, particularly if there was the sense that that workforce was fluid and maybe they were going to stay in this area, maybe they weren't. And that has a lot to do with where some of these companies perceive themselves in the next year, 10, 20 years. I mean, there's a lot more kind of chasing opportunities. And you see this all the time where a company will come in, go to the city, get sort of tax rebates, all this, and then they don't really intend to stay. They're like, okay, I'm going to take advantage of this for 5, 10 years, and then I'm going to get out of here and get another set of incentives.
Mhm.
And those employees, many of them are like, hey, fine. I mean, if you end up moving to another city, I'll move with you. I'm just renting to own anyway. So
Well,
good luck.
isn't this a large part of the $3.5 trillion that you are saying, you know, is it going to be spent? Isn't it people like Elon Musk and all these investors buying up neighborhoods and developing how much of that 3.5 trillion is this kind of investment that?
Not a whole lot of that, because we sort of separate out that kind of super wealth investment money. That 3.5 trillion is the money that's in the consumer bank account. And most of that was accumulated in 2020 because generally speaking, people spent 65% of their income on services. So for a solid year and a half, you couldn't spend on services. So that money got saved. We normally save at around a 6% rate. And for 3 quarters in 2021, we were saving at a 38% rate. We could not spend it because we did, I mean, 2020, we couldn't spend it on the services we normally spend on. So a lot of that 3.5 trillion is still in the hands of not the super rich, but the people who are 75, 100, 150, 200,000 a year. They used to spend a lot of their money going golfing, going to resorts, going out to eat, going to ball games. None of that stuff they could do. So the money just sat there, and it's still there. And the question is, are they going to go back to spending it on services? Are they going to spend it on things? How fast are they going to spend it? So the sector that we're watching most closely, and that gets captured by that number, is that 75,000 to 250,000 a year range.
Those are our customers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's people, and that's one of the big questions. It's like for 2020 and 2021, you suddenly got people nesting and saying, if I've got extra money, I'm going to spend it on where I live. And just, you know, very personally, my own generation, my own life, I used to spend quite a bit of money on kind of the social stuff. But for the last 10 years, it's like, no, we spend it on the home. Because when I'm not on the road, I don't want to go out and do anything. I just want to stay home and enjoy a glass of wine on my deck. And that's why I'm getting a new deck in the spring. And it's like, it's a big deck and it's going to cost 20, 30,000 bucks. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's what I want to do. I don't want to travel anymore. I do enough of that as it is. I don't care about the other stuff. What I do want is a good place to drink wine. So.
Do you see any consequences at all with the election, or is this all pretty much look like it's predetermined, based on the forecast?
Well, it's not so much predetermined, though I think it probably is. The thing is that we've learned over the years, and politicians dearly love to talk about things over which they have no control. Because then when nothing happens, they can say, well, it wasn't our job to begin with. It's like, I just crack up when people are saying inflation is a problem. It is. What do you plan to do about it? Well, I'm not going to inflate. Inflate what? Well, I think it should be going down. Good for you, Congressman. How do you plan to do that? Well, I'm going to fix the supply chain. Really, you're in charge of China now. I'm gonna do something about oil prices. Really? I mean, Biden comes up. I'm going to tax the oil companies. Joe, do you understand that businesses pass on taxes? So all you're going to do is make it even more expensive. And by the way, have you ever heard of the market? The oil companies are not the ones that set the price. The market set the price. If you want to lower oil inflation, well, then quit dinking around with Russia and just nuke the bastards and move on. It's kind of like you're trying to sanction them into, I don't know, a couple of ICBMs to hit the Kremlin would kind of do the trick, I would think, but that's just my belligerent militaristic self.
Any other questions? I don't want to keep Dr. Kuehl too long, but Joe?
I do have one. Over the last 2 years, we've seen this upward rise in our costs that then get passed along to our consumers. We're starting to really feel and hear that our customers, which are at the high end, ultra high end point of the market, starting to push back.
Right.
It's the first time in the last 2.5 years we've felt this, where they're like, whoa, all right. Last year, my kitchen cabinets were 40 or 50 grand. This year they're 65, 75,000. Like what, like their level of, and you're talking about your deck, a deck that was 30,000 last year, this year is 40,000.
Right.
And a lot of that is labor, right?
Yep.
So our cost of labor is way, way up. Our materials have finally leveled off, but it's labor, to get
Yep.
staff. So, and to keep staff, there's just, it used to be 3 to 5%, per year. Now it's 10 to 20% raises, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and that is not going to get any better because we're finally kind of catching up to what we should have been concerned about long before now. I mean, we've lost about 27 million boomers who have left the workforce. I mean,
Right.
some of them have just retired. Some of them are, we were famous for hanging in there, but now the older boomers are in their 70s and 80s. So the old tricks that we've used in the past simply aren't working. We used to do
Yeah.
immigration, and it was like, well, we don't have jobs for people who don't have skills and have language barriers, not like we did 20 years ago. Now we need a bunch of people on the border saying, hey, I'm a trained carpenter and I know how to run a CNC machine. Well, that's not who's trying to get into the country. And so we don't really have that as an option. And it just shocks me that there was no preparation for this because honest to God, when Junior was born, all you had to do was add 65 to that year and know when he was going to retire. You can't tell me that you're surprised. It's chronological, Congressman. 65 follows 64. Funny how that works. So
Kind of like the
we didn't
25th follows the 24th.
yeah, exactly. So we weren't readying ourselves. We don't have a population as old as Japan or even as Europe, but it's getting up there, and we don't have replacement level births anymore. So I don't know what you do to kind of replace this. That's why the manufacturers have turned to automation, but there's a limit to what you can ask automation to do. What I suspect is likely to happen is that we will start to revisit immigration in a different way. The continent that is lining up to kind of be the next big thing is Africa. 50% of the African population is under the age of 30. It's the youngest continent on the planet. Most of them now are educated because these countries put education up as the top priority, but they have no jobs for them. So you end up with people who are well trained and end up having to look elsewhere. We've seen it in the professions for years. I mean, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I was going through throat cancer. And so I had a radiologist and I had 2 oncologists and I had a surgeon to put the hole in my throat and all that stuff. Not one of these guys was from the US. My surgeon was Ethiopian. My oncologists were Pakistani and Indian. My radiologist was from Algeria. And it was like, I'm talking to the surgeon and he goes, if I'm back in Ethiopia, I'm basically working in an ambulance. I'm a trained surgeon. I'm not going to work there. I'm going to work here. My radiologist was like, do you know how many radiology centers there are in Algeria? None. So that's why I'm here. And it's like, good, because you got the cancer and I'm happy now. So the whole time I'm talking to these guys, I'm like, you do know what I do for a living. Do not screw up my throat. Thank you.
I will say that I have a much more positive outlook on where we are as a country, having heard your presentation, because you're right. It's like all doom and gloom is all we hear. And that, it's impressive what we
And
have.
that's one of the dangers when the politicians bring up the economy. It's always with an eye towards scaring people. It's like, if you don't vote for me, you're all going to die. And so there's the tendency to over dramatize. You'll be amazed at how quickly the political class starts to sing the praises of the economy after the election.
Mhm.
Because then any sort of improvement, whoever's in power is going to take credit for it and
Right.
say, see, it's all better now because you elected me. And it's like, you didn't do a blessed thing. These were the decisions of 3.5 million Americans and 800,000 businesses. And I'm still convinced that the most feared words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. So
Wow. Well, okay. You have Dr. Kuehl's email address there. Within 24 hours, you will get a follow-up email with a recording and more information on how to get in touch with Chris, if you want to, and some of his information here, these different flagship and strategic intelligence monthly things that he puts out. So I highly recommend that we all stay informed and spread the word. The
Very
sky is
good.
only falling if we keep talking about the sky falling.
Exactly. Exactly. We can talk our way into a recession. We can talk our way out of one. So
And Chris,
thanks.
let us know if you lose your job, because then we'll know if we're
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
recession.
Exactly. So
Don't
far
lose
we've been
your
able to
job.
survive. Yeah, exactly. The last time that happened was the 1930s, so we're safe. So
Thank
All
you,
right.
Chris. It was
thanks,
great.
guys.
You
Great
lost
seeing
your
you.
job in the 1930s? I'm just
Well,
kidding.
some economists did, you know. but
Just kidding.
I would have been a little young back then.
I'm just joking. All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
Y'all have a great day.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks for setting it up.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thanks.